set of 9 videotapes provides an opportunity to share in a unique experience where Stafford Beer introduces an audience to the world of managerial cybernetics. The event took place over 5 days in July 1994 at the Falcondale Hotel near Lampeter in Mid Wales. It was organised by the Liverpool Business School at John Moores University, where Stafford is Honorary Professor in Organisational Transformation and a Senior Fellow. The aim was to provide a video learning resource by recording discussions between Stafford and an audience that had little or no previous knowledge of the subject. Over the course of the event, Stafford explains the development of the subject from the initial scientific discovery of cybernetics. Through his own development of managerial cybernetics, he introduces the tools and models that he has created to offer an alternative approach to conventional management practice. The resulting material embraces the key principles and models that have previously been introduced in his 13 books and referred to in many of his published papers. This is the first learning resource where all these have been brought together in one integrated way. Managerial cybernetics continues to be the only available scientific and coherent account of effective managerial practice. Stafford provides numerous anecdotes, applications and insights from the perspective of practitioner, manager and scientist. The fifth session starts with agreement on the teams who will model the viability of selected activities. These are retailing, education, manufacturing, Welsh Parliament and transport. Stafford models defence as a total system to illustrate how you identify the active components of a viable system. Discussions move on to modelling a manufacturing operation embedded in its environment and its management embedded in the operation. The communication between each of these elements is depicted by loops with amplifiers and attenuators designed to balance the variety. This simple model can be used in any conceivable circumstance to check the efficacy of any management action. And to demonstrate this, Stafford challenges the audience to re-examine TQM, JIT, project management, market research and advertising. The basic model is completed by adding elements of channel capacity and transduction that must also have requisite variety. Stafford advocates that managers should be measuring things that would detect instability and using computers to communicate these messages in real time. The same basic model is used to talk about the military, the use of computers, President Allende in Chile, the President of Uruguay, market research, mission statements, and a very canny steel salesman.
Tell me what you've done about this grouping business.
Oh, we grouped.
Generally grouped. So what are the areas? That's what I need to know.
Well,
Manufacturing?
Pardon?
Manufacturing?
Manufacturing. Yeah, put your hands up so I can get some idea. Yeah, thank you. That's three.
Retail?
Pardon?
Retail.
Well, retail outlets in the end.
Yeah.
We put it under the title of retail and all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
Manufacturing, retail,
Education.
education. It's very broad, yes.
We'll narrow it down.
Who's education? Oh, I see, you. Yeah, you should have said you don't have to be one group necessarily, you know, you can be two, but I just want to get some focus, that's all.
A democratic Welsh Parliament.
That's not what it started out as.
It's not viable. It's very good.
And me and Claire are British Rail.
Mhm.
Transport, specifically British Rail.
Gosh, we got 5, have we?
Yeah.
Retailing, education, manufacturing, Welsh Parliament, transport. Oh, well, good world out there, isn't it? Right, so now we are going to solve the whole problem of how you model a viable system, given we've got some tools in place now and some insights, I hope. And the first thing you'll realise is that we are not going to do anything like the business of the family tree, you know, which is what you will find wherever you go. And I will say that this thing, in all my life, I've gone into assignments and they've said proudly, this is our organisation chart. The only use for this thing is to find out who you can blame. There's no other value. And you see all this stuff, and then the sophisticated versions have things going across with funny coloured lines and dots and things, pretending that somebody is somebody's cousin, you know, and it means something. Oh, dear me. And what's more, they ramble all over the place. Now, what we are going to do is say, okay, I have identified a viable system, and it has components. These components are viable systems. That's all. So we never have more than 2 levels. Unlike the organisation chart, which rambles on forever down the side of the building, for instance. Say. So how can this possibly be? Well, I'm going to take the example of defence, because it's something that's readily understandable. You say, I'm going to model defence, and partly because it doesn't come up. Model defence. So that's the total system. What are the active components of this viable system? Pardon? Oh, no. What is it? What is it?
The different forces.
What's its? Yeah,
Navy,
what's its membership?
Oh, right.
Yeah. No, its membership is quite clearly the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and perhaps something else. So that is what I call System 1. System 1 is to be identified as what is going on that makes the viable system what it is. And you see, I failed to get you to identify any systems just now which are not viable. And I found that quite fascinating. You seem to be willing to think of anything as a viable system. Well, I think we shall find out that some are not. But you see, you can certainly consider an army without an air force. Wouldn't be very effective, it get plastered. But there it is, it's an army, brown jobs, you know, different uniform altogether. Navy, Air Force. Now, that's all. Now, supposing you're the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, then you may say, look here, Stafford, I mean, I'm a big shot, I'm running the whole bloody army, and you just got me down in this box. Say, hold it, General, Field Marshal probably. I'm coming to you in a minute. Forget the Air Force, forget the Navy. Now we're talking about the Army. What is the System 1 of the Army?
Soldiers, the infantry.
Infantry. What else?
Artillery, tanks.
Tanks.
Artillery.
Artillery. Poor old engineers, where are they? Yeah. So these are now the System 1. Note the second level of recursion of defence. So if you're actually doing this job, you will have to do several second level recursions, because you would have defence with Army, Navy, Air Force. Then you would have to do, this is the Army, tanks, etc., etc. This is the Navy, destroyers. This is the Air Force, bombers, fighters. So that is how this thing is built up. Now, let us take the artillery. I am the MGRA, as he is known, the Major General Royal Artillery, and I'm now saying, hey, you know, I'm a general, don't treat me like a box. Call it general, I'm coming to you. This is the Royal Artillery. Now, what is the System 1?
10-inch gun. Mauser.
That's very close. Field artillery, anti-aircraft, heavy artillery, mountain artillery. So you go on. And you will go on in these paired viable systems until you hit the deck, which is bound to be actual people, because it always is, which is interesting. We're talking about organisations. You don't have organisations and computers. You have organisations that end up with people. So, in the case of, let's take the infantry, which you mentioned, you are coming down this line and you come to a regiment and the components of the regiment, and then, what are they?
Battalions.
I caught myself out here. Pardon?
Battalions.
Battalions, thank you very much. The battalion, its components are going to be, I guess, companies by now. Companies, platoons. Platoons, now you've hit the deck. Now you've got sections of men. So your company is about 100 people divided into 3 platoons of 30, let's say, and your platoon is now going to be the platoon commander and the sections of soldiers. So that's how it works. So it's always in pairs, and now you see the importance of the notion of recursion, because you've got the same model all the way through. Now this is very startling to people who studied organisations, because they expect them all to be different, and what is written on the side of it, of IBM, is not going to be the same as what's written down the side of General Motors. In our case, it's going to be the same until you look at the close print. Now this has an immense and immediate advantage that I would like to point out to you. You trying to institute change in an organisation, and we've had in our lifetime some enormously universal example of that with the introduction of computers and automation. Now, I got my first computer in 1956 because I was, as I told you, I was in on the ground floor of this, and I was determined to get one. I had the 7th Pegasus. And, you know, those were the days. I'm busy now in the Science Museum, for goodness sake. I was terribly proud of this thing.
Terraced house in Basingstoke.
So, this filled a semi-detached house itself, yeah. Although it was in Sheffield, not Basingstoke. And it had a revolving drum for the short-term memory with 1,024 words on it. Wow! Read it. Oh, it's very exciting. And you had to keep the thing at the right temperature or it blew up, and humidity, and unbelievable. So, after the mid-50s to the mid-60s, people started going into organisations and saying, you're going to be automated or computerised or whatever. Where is the organisation chart? Now we're back to this family tree bit. So in you come, you band of happy technologists, and you say, chaps, we're going to computerise you. Kindly tell us what you will do. So you're going to do all this. And you go through that, and you put it all on computers. Now, this is what I used to castigate as automating the quill pen. Because you didn't stop to wonder if things should be different now you've got a computer. You said, you're writing that, don't need to write it anymore, old chap, we can put it in the machine. And the result was that it took a year to do this department, and then you breathed a sigh of relief and hoped the thing got debugged. went down the corridor, knocked on the door and said, "What do you do in here?" and started all over again. Now, you can see that with my approach, if you're in some kind of context, like a manufacturing company, or a retailing company, or government, or whatever it happens to be, you are likely to be able to build the same model at every level of recursion in terms of your computers, because it's the same kind of stuff going on. And suddenly you've got immense saving, because you are looking at things through the same pair of eyes. And when we built the model, you can test that assertion out and see what happens. But this is the secret of what I did in Chile for President Allende, which is really quite a famous piece of historical work because of what happened to him and to poor old Chile in the process of running foul of the CIA and Dr. Kissinger. In 2 years, I had 75% of the social economy automated in this system. And all my critics said, "This is impossible, it's got to be a ridiculous claim, you couldn't do it." Why? Because they're used to this approach of going in there. Actually, 75% of the social economy, you do the first department in the first 2 years. But I had 11, watch it, 11 levels of recursion. Like that, through the thing. So, very exciting. Anybody's politically motivated to read that up. The second edition of the book, Brain of the Firm, the last 5 chapters, tell the story of how this was applied in Chile. And it's fairly racy stuff, I can tell you. It was an exciting time. Most exciting time of my life. So, the notion of recursion, the notion of 2 stages at one go, clear? Now, what are you going to do? What is that? That is the situation. And why does it look like it looks? Because, as we've already said, we find it very hard to understand the boundaries of a system, and we are wise to think carefully about just what we're including or just what we're not including. So I always draw this rather amorphous shape, I call it an amoeba, to remind ourselves that we're not sure where this is. What we're much more sure of is that embedded in this is a circle, and so I draw that as a proper circle, which is the process that you are managing. This is what you think you're running. You think you're running this if you correctly identified it, and I really softened that up yesterday, didn't I? So don't be naive about it. That's what you think you're running. And embedded in that is the square, which is the management. Now, I like to draw it like that because obviously the management is supposed to be infusing across its own boundaries by osmosis or whatever the process it's supposed to control, and the process is infusing out into the environment, which in the case of manufacturing would be the market, and this is the manufacturing factory. So that is the basic model of a viable system. Now what we need to do is pull this apart in order to discuss it more fully. And what I'm going to do is draw my circle there, my box there, and my circle there, and my amoeboid shape there. And instead of all this woolly business about how this is to be disseminated, I am going to put a simple thing like that. So I'm saying the management has influenced the process, and the process will come back and influence the management, and the process will affect the environment, and the environment will affect the process. So that is our basic model. So these are the 3 things that are going to formulate the system 1. So, going back, if this is the whole thing we're dealing with is defence. Now that's the Army, that is also the Navy, that is also the Air Force. It looks like that. Now, what can we say about this? Now, I've tried very hard to rattle you about the question of variety. And there's a hell of a lot of variety milling around there, which I've reduced to 4 arrows. Now, can we think of anything to say about that variety that's depicted flowing on those 4 arrows? Apart from the fact that there are dozens and dozens of arrows which are all encapsulated in one.
Are we assuming that they're matched?
Ah, exactly. Well, are they?
No, but is that what we're to assume because there is one of each?
No, we're not to assume anything.
No.
We've written this model on the mirror, and now we're going to ask what we know about the variety. Have a go, because there's some things we can say.
What goes into synchronous command?
Very true, yes, but that's not what I'm after. Now, do you remember I was saying to you that it's frightening to think you've got to measure all these possible states, but you probably don't have to, because do you remember the example of who does this coat fit? Now, if you think in those terms of relative variety, who has the bigger variety, the management box or the process?
Process.
Obviously, isn't it? Obviously. The management isn't going to note that you on machine number 6 have blue eyes. Although you have. No, you haven't. Sorry. No offense. The management, I mean, all those details are in place and constitute part of the variety, which may or may not be important. For instance, eyes suddenly become important if you start flashing welding guns, what do you call it, oxyacetylene around. So you never know what's going to be relevant, but what you do know for sure is that the variety of the process is greater than the variety of the management. Now then, requisite variety, problems. And what about the relationship between the process and the environment?
The environment's more complex.
Obviously, again, quite obviously. So without actually measuring anything, we know fine that this is the inequality we're dealing with. There's a big V there, and a smaller v there, and a very small v there. And the mathematical symbolism for this is that this is very much smaller than that, and this is very much smaller than that. And that is the mathematical inequality that we have to deal with. Now, so let's take it easy, calmly. What can you do about that? You know from Ashby's law that that's no go. The environment's going to swamp the process, and this process is going to swamp the management. Now, there are only 2 things you can do, actually, if you think about it in general terms. What can you possibly do?
Reduce the variety.
Yes. Reduce the variety of what? So, you want to reduce that bottom arrow.
So
Right. And then you could reduce the one going to the management. Okay? What else can you do? Precisely. Increase the variety going up. Now, there's very little symbolism required here, but I'd like you to get hold of it because it's useful to us. These symbols come from ordinary electrical engineering. This symbol is an attenuator and means reduce variety. This symbol is also an attenuator, and this symbol is an amplifier. Now we've got the whole story in a nutshell. Very fast too. And I submit that that will apply to anything you care to analyse. So the question is, what management techniques are available to us to effect these amplifications and these attenuations? Now, I have challenged audiences, particularly senior management audiences, for 30 years to tell me a single management technique that isn't one of those four things. Nobody has ever succeeded. So I'm asking you, name a management technique. You know, they're the sort of things that people buy by the bushel and run up the masthead and everybody has to salute.
TQM.
TQM.
Total Quality
Perfect.
Management.
Perfect example. Now what's that supposed to be doing?
That's the problem, everybody else.
I'll say.
It's supposed to be making everybody involved in the company see that their input is important to the total end quality of the end product.
Yeah, that's right. Well, now put it in terms of our model. What's it doing on this line, this bottom line here, which is the attenuation line? What is TQM doing there?
It's making people more responsible for what they're doing so that they don't mess up.
Absolutely right, except that I think that's the next one.
All right, sorry.
There's a process affecting the management. You're making people more responsible. And on this side, you're trying to convince your customers, for example, that they come first, that quality matters and all that jazz, which is to attenuate their variety, because if you're successful, you cut down complaints, everything's sweetness and light. See, now, you will know if this system is in balance because you will be in homeostasis. And the interesting thing about having to measure variety and so on is that if it's working, you don't have to, because everything is sweet. Now, Ashby calls that situation a self-vetoing homeostat, by which he means that the messages on all four of those lines are, I'm okay. Instead of, here's my balance sheet, here is my list of this against that, and this is how I've succeeded and failed. He just says, I'm all right, how about you?
Black box a little bit.
Absolutely a black box, precisely correct. Now this is very exciting because we can begin to see, I told you right early on that I see management as the process of coping with complexity and not managing their materials, machinery and money. Well, here it comes, you see. We are trying to handle the complexity which will engulf us if we don't handle it. So let's take another example. We've had TQM. What else do you do in management?
JIT. Just in time.
Shit. I've not heard it called shit before. Yes, just-in-time management. Well, you mentioned it. Tell me what it is here. It's so obvious, isn't it?
I didn't expect you to say that. I thought you were going to tell me.
You do
Here
some
again,
work.
it comes in. The problem is you mentioned it with TQM. The two are interlinked, but it's effectively people taking responsibility to minimise
Well,
the
it's
time.
more than the responsibility this time, because
Process.
you were dealing with the flood of variety that would otherwise engulf you if you ordered everything randomly in advance, and you were saying, I'm not going to order this until I need it. So it's a huge attenuator on this line. It's just-in-time management.
On which line is that? The amoeba to
This one.
Right. Isn't it also the amplifier management process?
We haven't had an amplifier yet, so
Isn't it the fact that you're increasing the variety of the management by, in a way, making the job, I don't know, slightly, well, more complicated, but it increases the variety of the management. Isn't it like the, isn't it an amplifier on the management?
I'm not sure.
process?
You see, look here, there's no school book answer to this, because what you find is that because these are real life techniques, that they appear all over the place. The only point of trying to identify them is to understand the machinery. Now, I don't think that just-in-time management is usefully described on the amplifier loops. I think it's very much about cutting down the variety of all the capital investment and hoo-ha-ha that's involved in the purchasing system. I'm talking now, of course, about the manufacturing company. We have to bear in mind our other things as well. But I don't think schools work just-in-time management, except the whole thing is just-in-time.
How about looking at project management? Would that be an amplifier? Because you're looking at
Yes.
a complex situation,
Right.
and you're having to cope with the people, equipment, and you're making it more complex, and you're trying to manage that complex project.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jane. So you're looking
So
at that amplifier from the square to the circle, right?
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
And you were saying, well, I'm going to focus something in order to amplify me as a manager. I will have a project team with this task. And that goes round that loop, of course, because they're
So
reporting back
You agree that
the other
would be
way.
an amplifier?
I think so. Don't you? I mean, we're just trying to find out the best use of the terminology. Yeah.
I agree it's an amplifier, but I think I would have said from the process, what's the circles, the process
Yeah.
to the
Environment.
environment.
Well, it depends what sort of project it is.
Yeah.
It could easily be. I mean, the one that I think Jane had in mind was if you send a production engineer out from the management, the square, to the process to improve the process, nothing to do with the environment. But if you send out a project team into the environment to do, for instance, market research, then you're out there.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, market research is a very interesting example. Who wants to risk saying where that belongs on this diagram?
Market research is an it's going from the amoeba into the circle.
Yes, on the attenuating link then.
On the
Yeah, you're a very bright lot. You
That
see,
bit.
most people think that.
can't get the word
Well,
right.
just get used to the technical terms. This thing is an attenuator, which means it's cutting down variety, and the arrow is an amplifier. Now, most people fall into the trap, and I'm very glad you haven't, because it shows you're thinking of assuming that the purpose of market research is to amplify something, get more knowledge. But of course it isn't. It is to cut down the variety of everything that's out there in order to locate your targets. Otherwise you're just preaching to the heathen and nobody knows how the heathen are structured. You find out how the heathen are structured, you can target them. So it's very, very strong attenuator. Now, some of this stuff is, however, an amplifier. What is that when we interact with the market? That's an amplifier.
Advertising.
Pardon?
Advertising.
Advertising, of course. And that is an attempt to say we are much better than you think we are.
Much better than we
are. So there you go with advertising. So it's fun, isn't it? Because this gives you a uniform way of assessing all this. Now, I think I should have brought that actually. There is a page in my book, Brain of the Firm, a double page. It's got almost every management technique I could think of on it. It classifies them under these heads. I think it really is quite fascinating to see that everything you do can be reduced to this. And one of the consequences of that for a manager, many managements drive themselves and their folk insane because of a bigoted view of what is correct. And they say, we obviously have to deal with this situation, and the way we are going to do it is payment by incentives or management by objectives or something. Now, supposing that the situation is that is a very nearly impossible thing to do, because maybe the unions are as bigoted as the management is the other way around. Would you believe you could get a rail strike like that? Now, if you were quite clear as a manager, or as a union for that matter, that you know what you are trying to do is actually to reduce or amplify variety on this arrow, and you know that this way of doing it is objectionable, and you choose another. Because you are now classifying your alternatives under these headings. And there's no reason why you should plump for one thing rather than another if it's going to have the same sort of effect of producing amplification where you want it, or the reverse. Now I find this absolutely incredibly exciting, because I mean, look, such a simple little model, and we haven't done it yet, by the way. We're already finding out that we can use this in any conceivable circumstances. We've already wrapped up the whole of theoretical management. It takes you 3 years to learn this in a business school. Now, so much for formal techniques, but supposing you just want to do something, you wake up in the morning and you say, why don't I do this? Now you analyse that by this chart and say, that just a minute, that sounds like a good idea, but what am I actually doing, and how am I disrupting the homeostasis? Wow, you may decide you better think again. So you see, what I'm really trying to say about homeostasis is that, think of the self-vetoing homeostat, that most things run themselves if they're left alone. And the idea of the manager as leaping around trying to control everything is not only silly but impossible, because he doesn't have requisite variety. And yet many managers have this image of themselves. Hitler did, you see, and look where it got him. He's trying to run everything. You can't do that. I mean, you can't do it. It's not that this is whether it's a good idea or not. It's not possible. So you mess around with your generals. Churchill was maybe as bad, of course, messing around with the generals who are supposed to be running the thing. Yeah. What I'm saying then is that the variety balance of homeostasis will take care of most things, and the manager's real job is to put the fine-tuning on, depending on his perception of the system he thinks he's controlling. Basically, the variety will absorb itself. And this is nowhere more obvious than in the gross case of a manufacturing company. There's the management, the manufacturing is going on in the circle, it is in tune with its environment. Now, what is going to happen on that loop? Somebody says, this is too expensive. So the orders start drying up. So you say, our market's being attenuated. Why is this? Oh, relax the price structure and see what happens. The amplifying message goes out saying, well, there's more than one way of skinning a cat, fellows. You can have a different bunch of tricks to pay for this, like installment plans or something like that, and suddenly the thing comes back again into balance. So the messages you're going to get, the messages you should be screening for, are the messages that tell you that the self-vetoing homeostat is getting unstable. Now that has all sorts of consequences. Once you can see that that's the point, it has all sorts of consequences in the way you organise your information system. Now, I was trying to argue earlier that people have computerised the quill pen. What we should be thinking is, now I've got this extraordinarily powerful tool called the computer, how do I rethink the process of managing, given that I have this capability? And you don't end up with anything like what you used to do. Why should you? The limits on what you used to do were the limits imposed by how much a person could write with a quill pen in a given amount of time. That's irrelevant now. So what is the thing you want to do with your information? What you want to do is is monitor these homeostats. Now, if you're going to do that, you better do it in real time. Why not? We have all the technology to do that, but again, we have copied the old thing, so we use all these computers and end up saying, here on the second Tuesday of this month, we are proud to present the results for last month. And that's a big update on what it used to be. It used to be 2 months out of date, now it's only a month out of date. Oh, great. Now, what can you do with these results? I mean, I've been on a large number of boards, and people come up with all these data and say, look, there it is. All you can do is cry into the beer and say, oh, God. And the best you can do is to say, we better learn from this, fellows. Don't let's do that again. But sure as hell it's too late for the stuff that's already happened. Now then, you use real time, and you say, there's nothing to stop me finding out what's happening now over there, because I've got it all wired up. Now, what's the good of that? Because, you see, if instead of being the second Tuesday of the month, you were actually yesterday, that sounds good, it's a big improvement and all that, but you still can't do anything about yesterday. So what am I fishing for? Can anybody tell me?
Feedback.
Pardon?
You want a very short feedback loop.
Yes, I do, but for what reason?
Response.
I've been talking about whether you could do anything about it.
You can find out fault when it's happening.
Right. What can you look for that you could change before it's too late? One word covers it all, actually. Anybody think of a suitable word there?
Baptist.
Baptist?
Adaptive.
Oh, I see. Very close.
Yeah, can you also rely on you can say it now?
Now I'm asking you what you are measuring.
The complexity.
Yes, complexity, that's good. But there's something, I mean, it's complex anyway. What is it about the complexity?
Very
Kathy, what is it about the complexity that we're after in this circumstance?
The variety.
Just push it. Yeah, but we're talking about whether we can do anything about it. We're talking about this time delay.
How complex it is.
Yeah, but that's going to be there all the time. What is happening now? What can we measure now that means we can do something about it before it happens? I'm nearly giving it to you.
It's the variation from your set conditions.
Right, that's getting nearer it.
Change.
Change, good.
Stability.
Stability, phew, thank goodness. Actually, it's instability that you're trying to measure. And you're picking up something that says, hold it, fellows, this is going unstable. Now we've got a chance to do something. We can move in and say, hold it, that's getting unstable. Don't let it happen. Now, all my reporting systems within the viable system theory are in real time aimed at that. To hell with history, pointless. You go in and you try and pick up instability before it gets damaging. Now, always this is possible in theory, you see, because something going along nicely, it doesn't normally just crash. It starts wobbling. You're after the wobble. Now, can we do that? Of course we can do it. The theories of mathematical statistics are immensely powerful. But you can't talk to a manager about theories of mathematical statistics. But that's what you need. And then, again, what are you going to measure? Now, we already had a bit of a go at that yesterday. If you start measuring all the routine things, they will wobble as they always do. And therefore you will not get any new information. And you'll say, oh, well, yes, the stock market's doing this, it usually does, and Tuesdays. So information, what is it, you see? Now, There are all sorts of people with a vested interest in information, trying to sell you newsletters, trying to sell you all sorts of things. I'll give you a definition. My definition of information is what changes us. Up to then, the stuff is data. Data is useless until it's transmogrified into something that changes you. And companies, hospitals, dear God, health service, spend millions and billions of pounds equipping themselves with useless data that they can't transmogrify, to use the word I use. Nobody asked me what that meant, but I guess you found out.
No. Just didn't ask.
Convert will do, you know. It means to change the form of into action. And that's the only thing that matters a damn. The rest is post-mortems, crying into the beer, all this. We don't need it. So that's what I've always tried to set up, and I've always tried to find things you could measure that would give you some information. Now, all this, I mentioned vested interests here. You see, accountancy and economics have huge investment in saying, this is what we measure. The fact that it's no good to you is neither here nor there. We're going to measure it, and it's going to cost you an absolute fortune to do it. Now I'd say, what can I measure that would detect instability? Now I want to tell you a little anecdote here, which is a true one. All my stories are true, unless I emphasize that they're not. A few years ago, Elena and I were appointed by the United Nations as consultants to the President of Uruguay. This is a dear, delightful man, a lawyer. His name is Dr. Julio Sanguinetti. He's no longer president because now they're working on a constitutional basis, and he lasts a few years and is then replaced. He was replacing a military junta, which has been in there for 12 years and committed mayhem, and we had all these problems about amnesties. Everywhere you go, you get this problem in the third world of, if everybody in this room has had a loved one tortured and killed, the first thing you want to do is wreak vengeance on the bastards who did it. But you see, the military is sitting there waiting to take over again at the drop of a hat. So you can't suddenly start trying all the generals and hang them. It's an awfully difficult situation. I've seen this over and over again. Well, Sanguinetti was faced with that. But that's another story. What I was getting to is, what can you measure now? I look for things that I can pick up in real time that be token instability. And I was explaining this. I was in Sanguinetti's office explaining this to him, Elena by my side. And he said, well, I think I've got a pretty good team in the presidential office. I'd like you to look at this. And he went over and got a book. And he showed me this book. And he said, this isn't all out of date, Stafford. I mean, you can see it's, this is this week. And it shows the main indicators. Now, that's the word everybody uses, you see, the indicators. You know, the PE ratio in a business, the rate of foreign exchange, these kind of things in government. So I said, well, yes, this is very good. And I was honest. I said, you know, I don't think I've ever seen a better set of government statistics geared to the point where the president can actually read it, rather than masses of bums. But, you see, I said, I'm looking for something more sensitive than these standard indexes. And he looked at me and he said, I'm going to risk this. He said, turn to the back of the book. Turn to the back of the book. He said, these figures I ask for every day, and everybody thinks I'm mad, but I've got a hunch that you won't. The sale of bus tickets. The sale of milk. I could have kissed it. I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about. If the bus ticket sales fall off from the norm, it means that people aren't going to work. If the bus tickets fall off you, I thought it was wonderful. Now then, the conclusion of this story is I went again with a letter into his office one day, and he was more or less leaping around, waving newspapers. He said, "Have you seen the newspaper?" "Yes, we've seen the newspapers." Now, the newspapers said, I forget exactly how long he'd been in office, it might have been 9 months or a year, perhaps it was a year. The newspapers reviewing the year had discovered that his policies were working. So there are all the usual indicators. The foreign exchange is better, the deficit is better, the trade gap is better, all this jazz. And he said, well, it shows you, this media thing that we've often talked about. He said, I knew that we were on the right course 9 months ago, and now they finally caught up and are telling the people that it's worked. And I said, yeah, well, that's the usual lag. But well done, Mr. President. And we were sort of drinking to that when Elena, who'd been thinking a bit in the background, said, excuse me, President, if you knew this 9 months ago, why didn't everybody else? And it can't just be that it hasn't seeped through the media. And he said, oh, I knew because of one of my special things in the back of the book. And when he got it, what do you think it was? Consumption of electricity on a daily basis. After 3 months, it meant that everybody was getting back to work. And he said, I knew when I saw this huge thing that it's working, but nobody thinks it out for another. And he said to us, you realise my government could have fallen a dozen times in the last 9 months because nobody knew this except me. Now, these are very telling arguments, aren't they? See, what it means is you've got to change the whole style of management. This is why we don't get anywhere. Because you call in consultants and they do their thing and they paste over the cracks. And you've had some, obviously. I can see the smirk on your face. You've got all the pet nostrums. You've got the firms of consultants who increasingly, you notice, are accountants, accounting firms with a management spin-off. And they've got a huge interest in what they say. After all, if you can tell a company that it's going bust and it better merge with another, then you've earned all your consulting money, and your other division, which is called mergers and acquisitions, is now going to cream off the rest. I'm dreadfully cynical about this. I'm really quite bitter because I've watched this happening in England, the United States and Canada, which are the rich countries that I know, just as I have watched the depredations of the World Bank and the IMF destroying the poor countries that I know, and I'm leaping around in the middle saying, oh my God, what can I do about this? Well, all I can do is try and promote this kind of thinking. Now then, requisite variety. So far, the whole of this session is devoted to this very silly little diagram, and I hope I can convince you it's not so silly and not so little. We've already got a lot out of this. You wouldn't think there was much more, would you? But there is. So far, we have been talking about requisite variety in terms of the blocks of available variety in the square and the circle and the amoeba. Now, we've only considered the arrows as means of redistributing that basic variety. But now I want you to think about the arrow. That is called a channel. And as I said before, the single arrow sums up a whole lot of channels. Now, use Ashby's law to think about the channel itself. What you come up with. Well, yes, that is Ashby's law, but put some flesh on it, Percy.
Would you want the arrows coming out to be the same variety as the arrows coming back in?
Well, no, because you put the amplifiers and attenuators on to deal with that. I'm talking about the channel itself. What are these channels in real life?
They've got to be big enough to have communication.
Spot on.
Yeah. Big enough
The
to
channel itself has got to have versatility, right? It's not enough to say, well, I've connected this to this and somebody's waving a flag. It's got to have enough. Yeah, the word in information theory is channel capacity, and it's a perfect word. Why don't we use it? Now, an awful lot of things that go on, which are supposed to work, fail because they don't have channel capacity. You know the famous poem, not waving but drowning? It's just doing this. It's not enough. Haven't got enough channel capacity. Now, let's try and poke, I'm talking too much, poke around in that and see what you come up with about channel capacity itself. What about advertising? We mentioned that. Now, you take a page in the Times or somewhere, and you could practically write the Bible on this page, and you could say, this is very high variety channel. Do you think anybody's going to read it? Where does all this white space come from, you see, in advertisements? See, it is an attempt to work out what the channel capacity is of the reader, because that's the guy who counts. We established that yesterday. That the perceiver is who counts in these systems. It's not what you think you've done, but what the receiver gets. Now, if the receiver sees a page of print like that, I'm not even going to look at it. So the alleged channel capacity in practice is nil. So you put a huge white page and in the middle of it you have hair. Do you remember that? No, you're too young. When the operetta, what is musical, whatever you're going to call it, my favourite, Hair came out, the advanced publicity was exactly that. All over London there were hoardings that just said hair and nobody knew what it meant. That's very clever. Now the channel capacity is being used in the most extraordinary way with all this white space and this one word on it that doesn't mean anything. Now I don't think that advertising boys are seeking these optima of channel capacity without understanding any theory. You know, they're doing it by hunch. So they walk around in purple trousers and call each other ducky and have these inspirations. But it'd be much better to try and measure a few things around here and see exactly what amount of information you are actually going to get across. Look at all the stuff about small print, for instance. Just incredible, you know. You think this insurance policy, read the small print. You know? Well, you can't. Nobody ever does. And it's become a joke. But on the other hand, it's a con trick. Come on, more about channel capacity. Look at the management end of this. I'm the big white chief, I'm the boss, and I say, this is my policy. What happens to that? I mean, there's all the workforce in the circle out there.
Memo.
Memo, yes. I mean, that sums it up, doesn't it? That's not going to work, is it? Nobody reads those things anyway. And what's more, it'll be put in the most gobbledygook, which managers think is impressive writing, and nobody can understand.
People don't try and get these mission statements and
I'm glad you mentioned that, Jane. Would you like to give us a disquisition about mission statements?
well, I've seen a lot of companies and they're all into this mission statements, and I reckon you could write a book on just I think you might have 20 sort of statements, which most of them have chosen from. Oh, well, I like that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
That's right.
I think that'll do. And then what happens is that they get these little cards, you know, these calling cards you get with your name on, which usually got the mission statements in the back, and they give these out. And then what happens is that these get printed out on all the on the notice boards, and everybody's supposed to read it. They even stand up and say, our mission is this, and people go, right. The manager goes, yes, our mission is this, you said it, and it goes, and then on the shop floor they're going, yeah, our mission is this, and
What
nobody's the
sort of thing
wiser.
is this? Is it sort of like we shine it better? Or?
Well, like Rover, we are committed to
Excellent.
giving a quality car,
Becoming world class.
become
world
world
class
class.
supplier
and-
You ran into this, Dave, obviously.
to the benefit of our shareholders
He's right.
and
It's
employees.
usually
I've got one in my room if you want to see
Yeah,
one.
you've got one on the
They
car.
I've got
state,
one.
they state the obvious.
Right. Now, Mr. Major institutionalised this, you know, with the customer, what's it called?
Citizens Charter.
Charters.
Yeah.
Have you read any of them? Charter for Health is to say, you know, we'll make you better or something.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just ludicrous.
Is that all the code hotlines pass on?
Well,
On the motorway?
Yes.
exactly. Now, I mean, when you really look at this, you can see it's well intentioned. When you think of it, what it costs and what it does to this variety equation is nothing. I'm so glad you said that, Jane. You've put it very nicely. I've seen hundreds of these things. That's unbelievably banal and dreadful.
That's something you can write a book and they pick out the book because they're
Absolutely.
Children's names.
yeah.
Mm. Well, I will give you a tip about those things, which you can use in a much wider scenario. Now, I used to study logic, and I still do, I suppose, but I stumbled on the following. You take a sentence and negate it.
What's that?
Say not somewhere. Say the opposite. Now, if you couldn't argue the opposite, it's not worth saying. Now, God exists. Oh no, he doesn't. There is no God. Now, we could burn each other at the stake. It's been done for hundreds of years over that argument. That is a real issue. But if you say, and I saw this in a mission statement, Jane, we will act within the law. Now, you can't possibly publish a statement that says we'll get around the law if we possibly can. It's meaningless. Yeah? And why I said it was much more use to you than the mission statement, if you're in a bookshop and you're trying to decide whether you want to buy this book, negate sentences at random and see if they're worth it. And you soon find that practically everything in the book is meaningless because you couldn't possibly say the opposite. It's a very good test. I really commend it to you. And of course, politician speeches. I was applying this the other day to Mr. Blair, and he didn't get very high marks. Anything he said was the same either way. You couldn't negate it. Did I tell you about the anagram?
Yeah.
So, some of these methods, we were looking at let me remind you, we were looking at the variety on the channel. And people don't, in short, they don't analyse it and do so yourselves and ask yourselves whether this good intention of the management telling the workforce something actually worked. and whether the workforce's attempt to come back to the management actually works, because that's likely to be written off as, oh, they're belly aching again, and it has no content. I really had an extraordinary life in dealing with this management union clash. As I said to you yesterday, it's totally unnecessary as far as I've ever been able to see.
There can be a tendency with those communication links where management will have good intentions and they communicate those good intentions. The natural fact that the policies and methods for getting those into
Right.
fruition aren't good enough, and so it doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
So there's a basic attitude that, well, what the management say they never do anyway,
Right.
and so the whole communication link breaks down with mistrust.
Right, well now,
Are you saying that it's fallen on deaf ears? Is that what you're saying?
It does eventually if
Yeah.
it doesn't get successfully achieved.
Mm.
That's always just
No.
lip service again.
you are discussing my next point before I've made it, you two. This is great. This is absolutely great. Can we just backpedal a minute and then I'll let you loose? Simple diagram, I said. Now, I repeat, blocks of requisite variety you've got to have in place. We've discussed that. Channel capacity. What's the other thing that's actually on that diagram that we have to attend to in terms of requisite variety? It's there, but I bet you haven't seen it. Try and answer what you think it might be.
Is it the flow around, the direction of the...
Well, you're getting nearer. Yeah.
Direction of the amplifier, perhaps.
Well, no, the directions are.
Oh, no, I suppose that's
there's-
maybe.
The response to a flow of information,
Mhm.
either its success or its failure,
Mhm.
being fed back, not necessarily as an indirect response, as a direct response. So you, no, I don't know.
Don't panic, Lindsay. You're very, very close to it. Now, try and analyse this. Well, we've got a message coming to deal with the requisite variety of the blocks. We've got a channel in place that we think is adequate. What can go wrong?
If it doesn't flow through the channel properly.
Yes, you're very close to it, you see.
Come on, Lindsay, come on.
Can you stop it?
The receptor. Someone's got to receive.
Receptor, that's the word. Now, our technical word for this, and I'm only giving you a minimum of technical words. It's here. There. What is happening at all those points?
It's a link.
No, for the whole diagram, what is going on? What characterises the thing?
Transducer.
It's a transducer, and that's the technical word. Well done. I can go home.
Can I start?
Thanks, Lee. Transducer, Latin transducere, lead across. So wherever, what I was asking you is, what have they in common, these points I've marked, these 8 points? What is it?
They're borders.
They cross the boundary. Exactly, Kate. They cross the boundary. So wherever you cross the boundary, you have to have requisite variety. If I'm Chinese and I understood everything, and I've got an enormous vocabulary, and I come and tell you the secret of the universe, and none of you speak Chinese, too bad. That's because there's no transducer. Now, you can get some of this stuff in place, and now you see why I said you're getting ahead of the story here, because both of you were talking about transduction, don't you?
In
Well,
the same way as if the president of, was it Uganda?
No, it wasn't.
That was close. Uganda.
Only the other side of the world. Interesting definition of close.
But it's all perception. But the reason why he would fit in the square, his government fits in the circle, or his country fits in the circle maybe, and the amoeba is everything else. And he hadn't actually communicated that things were on the up after 3 months, whatever. So even if like the ears were open in the rest of the country, why didn't he communicate that then? If
Well, he did, you see, but nobody heard him because there was no transducer. The press is the transducer, and they're busy rabbiting on about their own concerns and photographing people in the nude and so on, if they can catch them.
But how do you make these receptive?
Ah, well, you have to analyse it, you see. So if you're doing this kind of analysis, you go in there and you say, have I got requisite variety in the blocks? Have I got the channels? Now have I got the receptors? Now I want to tell you, because we need to wrap this session up, I want to tell you a little true story that illuminates this very well. When I first went into steel, I had to try and train myself in the whole business. I knew nothing about it. And there was a guy whose name was Tom, who was widely regarded as the best salesman we had. Now, selling in the heavy steel business is, it's not knocking on people's doors. It is actually, but you know what I mean. It's very high level stuff. So I set out with him. I spent a week with him to try and find out how he operated, and I learned an enormous amount. It began when we called on a buyer in Sheffield. And we were just leaving. It was a very satisfactory talk. I was just introduced as a trainee. Listened to how Tom handled this buyer. Got everything signed up. Was going out. He said, "Oh, like Columbo, no? It's a marvellous gesture." Excuse me. We have to go to something street to so and so. How do we get to that from here? "Oh," says the buyer, "please." Takes us to the elevator, comes down with us, goes into the street and said, "You see the boot sign up there, you turn left there," and so on. Now I knew precisely where this place was, and I'd only just got to Sheffield, and certainly as hell Tom knew where it was. So I said to him as we marched off, "What the devil's all that about?" "Oh," he said, "he's helped me. He is now in my power." Anyway, that's just a bit of psychology. I don't think it's anything to do with cybernetics. But so we went on. Now, the point of this story is that the company had the following revelation. They had realized that they had all these highly specialized salesmen who had these intimate relationships with clients, and the only information they were getting were the orders. So they said, why don't we ask our representatives to give us an estimate of the reliability of the company and the future of the order book, and a whole lot more jazz here than just saying here's an order for 20 tons of something. So they went into discussion with the salesman, and the salesman said, "Hey, just a minute, I mean, this is a whole new ballpark, and if you want us to do all this, we need time," and so on. So no unions involved, but effectively a union. Now these are very senior men. And so roughly what happened was that they put the sales force up by 20% in order to create the time for this new system to work. Now what you realise you are doing here is you're increasing the channel capacity. Good idea. Now I went off with Tom to the East Coast, somewhere near Hornsey, I think, between Hull and Hornsey. And we interviewed the right number of clients in the morning, and he said, "It's a lovely day, let's go for a swim." And we spent the afternoon lying on the beach, which I thought was jolly nice. And I said, how can we get away with this, Tom? I mean, well, he said, "It's the new system, you see. We've done enough for today." So I said, "Yeah, but you have to fill in all these forms, and you haven't." "Oh, we'll deal with that." So this guy's, wearing a pair of swimming trunks on the beach, pulls his briefcase across and starts writing figures all over the place. Well, I was looking and I said, "How do you know this?" "Poof," he said, I'm just making it up. I was very fascinated by this. Now, I didn't know as much then as I do now about cybernetics, but I was very actively trying to construct models. Now, what's happening here is that the company put in this system, arranged to receive the information and punch it onto Hollerith cards. None of you remember those things, I don't suppose, but that's how you stored information. You had a card with punched holes in it and you fed it through a machine. And all these Hollerith cards were on shelves. And the salesman very rapidly found out that nobody knew what to do with them. Now this is quite precisely a failure in the transducer, isn't it? There's all this information arriving, potential information, I should correct myself, data at this stage, which could become information, which is sitting on shelves in punch cards.
Now, there's more to it really, because after I got that put right and got the system to work, nobody believed it, because by now the salesman knew, in several sets of inverted commas, that nobody did anything. Therefore, what was coming through was by now garbage, and nobody knew. You see? So then they tried to change the system, and here we have a thing that's absolutely typical of the human nervous system. If you overload a transducer, it has what is called a refractory period. A neuron, a nerve cell, fires and then goes, oh, I need a rest. And the refractory period is the time it takes to sort of charge itself up and get its chemicals right to fire again. Now, you see, exactly this is going wrong, because all the transducers in this system are out of their refractory period, and there's no way of telling anybody that the new system will work, because they know it doesn't. Now they're told it does, but the new system is not through its refractory period yet. It's going to take you years to sort out this bloody mess. Isn't it interesting, isn't it? So, out of this little tiny diagram, blocks of requisite variety on the channels, requisite variety in the transducers. A hell of an assignment, you know.
But carrying on with this breakdown of the transducer in this company, what do you do? Because you say it could take years to change.
Well, why don't we have a break and address that question when we come back, because we're a bit overrunning.